After First Contact, Star Trek movies abandoned TNG's coolest Enterprise edition. Star Trek, the Next Generation's coolest invention, mostly disappeared from Star Trek movies after Star Trek First Contact. Set about 100 years after Star Trek, the original series, TNG introduced an entirely new cast of characters and also brought several new futuristic technologies to Star Trek canon. The USS Enterprise D of Captain Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart, was much larger than its predecessors and had numerous features earlier versions of the Starship and Enterprise lacked. The most versatile and impressive new technology introduced in Star Trek: The Next Generation was the holodeck. With a combination of replicator, transporter, and holographic technology, the holodeck could create a virtual world that felt realistic in almost every way. Starfleet's Galaxy-class ships like the Enterprise D were equipped with holodecks that could be used for training exercises, combat practice, and recreation. The holodeck also allowed TNG to explore different genres of storytelling, as the crew could visit holographic versions of historical periods and fictional worlds. Many episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation made use of the holodeck, and the technology played a role in the first two TNG films. In Star Trek Generations, Captain Picard and his crew celebrated Worf's, Michael Dorn, promotion to LT Commander on the holodeck with a simulation of a 19th century British naval ship. The holodeck returned in Star Trek First Contact, in which Captain Picard and Lily Sloan, Alfred Woodard, escaped from the Borg in a Dixon Hill holoprogram. When Picard disabled the holodeck's safety protocols, he was able to dispatch 2 Borg drones using a Tommy gun. Although Vice Admiral Doherty, Anthony Zierb, had hidden a giant holoship on the Baku planet in Star Trek Insurrection, the technology itself played a relatively minor role in the film. Star Trek Nemesis did not use the holodeck at all, raising the question of why the films mostly dropped the technology. TNG, Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, and Star Trek Voyager all did their fair share of holodeck stories, so perhaps producers felt that the technology had been overused. How many times can the holodeck safety protocols malfunction, after all, before people begin to question why the technology is still in use? Although Gene Roddenberry had a concept for a holodeck-like technology during Star Trek, the original series, the holodeck itself did not debut until Star Trek: The Next Generation. As seen in TNG's premiere, holodecks were still relatively new technology even by the mid-24th century. J.J. Abrams' Star Trek 2009 takes place in the 23rd century, meaning holodecks had not yet been invented. With the alterations in the Star Trek timeline caused by Nero, Eric Bana, Abrams' Kelvin universe has already spun off in different directions than Trek's Prime universe. It's unclear how the changes in the Kelvin universe will affect the invention of the holodeck, but Captain Kirk, Chris Pine, and his crew will likely never get to experience the technology. The J.J. Abrams' Star Trek films incorporate big sci-fi action scenes and galaxy-level threats, not leaving much room for holodeck storylines, even if the technology had been available. With its 20-plus episode seasons, Star Trek: The Next Generation had more time to show its characters spending their downtime on the holodeck, but Star Trek's big-screen adventures rarely have that luxury. After the first contact with alien species in the Star Trek universe, the franchise saw a seismic shift in how humanity interacted with the galaxy. However, when Star Trek transitioned to feature films, one of the coolest additions to the Next Generation's TNG Enterprise was sadly abandoned: the multi-dimensional exploration of the ship's saucer separation. Introduced in Star Trek: The Next Generation's pilot episode, Encounter at Farpoint, the Enterprise D's ability to separate into 2 distinct sections was a game-changer for both tactical and narrative storytelling. This feature not only demonstrated the technological superiority of the Galaxy-class starship, but also opened up endless storytelling possibilities that were largely left untapped, particularly in the cinematic adaptations. The potential of saucer separation in its initial form, the saucer separation was a brilliant way to address practical concerns about a starship full of civilians, including families and children. The saucer section could detach, providing a safe retreat for the non-combatant population, while the star drive section, armed with more firepower and tactical prowess, would face whatever threat emerged. This dynamic underscored a key theme of the Next Generation: Starfleet wasn't just about combat, it was an institution focused on exploration and peaceful diplomacy, and the ship itself was built with that in mind. The use of saucer separation wasn't just limited to protection, though. It represented a broader concept of versatility and adaptability. Narratively, the split created opportunities for parallel storylines, where the crew could simultaneously manage different missions or crises. Visually, the split could heighten drama, particularly during battles or emergencies. In an era of space operas like Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica, this innovation set Star Trek apart, highlighting its intellectual depth as well as its technological inventiveness. Despite this rich potential, the cinematic version of Star Trek: The Next Generation rarely took full advantage of this feature, relegating the saucer separation to near obscurity. While it was hinted at in the early seasons of the show, by the time the Enterprise D transitioned to the big screen, the saucer separation had essentially become an afterthought. Why did the films abandon saucer separation? Several factors contributed to the abandonment of the saucer separation feature in the TNG films. One primary reason was the shift in tone from exploration to action-oriented blockbusters. Starting with Star Trek Generations in 1994, the Next Generation films leaned more heavily into space battles, intense confrontations, and high-stakes scenarios. The cerebral, diplomatic nature of TNG gave way to more visceral storytelling that emphasized explosions and spectacle over thoughtful problem-solving. While this shift attracted mainstream audiences, it also diminished some of the uniqueness that had defined TNG's vision of the future. Additionally, the practical limitations of special effects at the time played a role. Saucer separation required intricate CGI and physical modeling, particularly during scenes where both parts of the ship were active in combat or complex maneuvers. Given the budget constraints of 1990s filmmaking, the expense and effort involved in crafting these sequences might have been seen as too steep for the returns. A full-scale separation scene likely would have cost millions of dollars, money that could instead be spent on faster-paced, more accessible action sequences. Moreover, as the TNG films sought to establish their place in the Star Trek movie pantheon, there was a clear effort to streamline the storytelling. Many of the film narratives focused on tighter, more contained stories, and saucer separation simply didn't fit into the more condensed, linear formats. The films, unlike the television episodes, didn't have the luxury of time to explore multiple storylines or complex tactical maneuvers that the saucer separation offered. The missed opportunities in retrospect, it's clear that abandoning the saucer separation was a missed opportunity for Star Trek. Imagine how different Star Trek First Contact might have been if the Enterprise E, the newer and sleeker version of the flagship, had retained the ability to separate. When fighting the Borg, for instance, the film could have explored the dynamic between a detached saucer section tasked with defending the ship's civilians and a battle-hardened star drive section engaging the Borg cube. The dual narrative could have allowed for a more complex battle strategy, emphasizing the ingenuity of Starfleet's finest officers. Similarly, Star Trek Insurrection or Nemesis could have benefited from the feature as well. These films leaned heavily on action sequences, and the saucer separation could have provided a fresh twist on space combat, allowing for a more strategic approach to warfare. The ability to separate could have been used to outmaneuver enemy ships, adding another layer to tactical engagements.